Hello, everybody. This is the first of these videos I'm going to do. I'm going to term them Codas. So, as I'd said in the last video, I'm going to switch over to a once a month upload schedule for the main videos, but to kind of act as supplementals to the main videos, to include anything that I wanted to talk about in one of the main videos, but just didn't have a place to fit it in. Answer any questions that I get. Talk about the process of recording and headed forward, or just anything else that I want to put in. If I don't have anything particular for that month, then I just won't do a Coda video. I'm not going to do these just to do them, but I thought they would be a fun little addition. And these videos are going to have a bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. It's going to be less scripted, so I'm just going to kind of go with the flow, respond to whatever I feel needs to be responded to. Just go from there. So, as it regards to the last two videos, offline I got some comments from some folks who I know who said, the good videos, but I thought, they thought, that part of the point of the channel was to kind of set up bad historical narratives and then come up with a counter to those. And they thought that was a bit lacking in the last videos, or at least it was not as easy to determine what I was kind of like counterpointing, point and counterpoint. And I think that's pretty fair critique now that I look back. I didn't set up as clearly what it was that I was, what it was I was trying to counterpoint. I just kind of mentioned it in very vague ways. So, the first video talking about the process, from the foundation of the Republican Party up until the end of Reconstruction, the thing that I was trying to counterpoint there was the prevalent narrative that the Republican Party was until recently, or still is, the real party of civil rights and of anti-slavery. My point again was that to the extent that that was true, that essentially ended by the 1880s. And then the Republican Party no longer could really claim to be the party of Lincoln. It had fundamentally changed somehow. You see a lot of these. Knowing Better did a video on sort of the ship of Theseus and the political parties, but even in his video, it's sort of constructed in a way to say that, well, the political parties had these coherent ideologies, and then it was only recently that this switchover happened. And my point is more that, between the end of Reconstruction and the Truman administration, which we'll eventually get to, there was a very large dead zone when it came to civil rights and the government taking an active interest in that. And as I said in the last video, the FDR administration did have some interest in it, but it really was not the type of active interest that a lot of civil rights activists, including Eleanor Roosevelt, would have liked to have seen. And then with that second video, the narrative I'm contradicting is that the Democratic Party is, quote, the party of the Klan, or, the party of slavery. And again, just setting it up to show that there was, amongst other things, I think there were a few things I was trying to say in that video about, the divided nature of the parties at that time, about how a lot of people will sometimes say that the parties really weren't ideological until the 1960s or 70s. And I mean, that's kind of true. I know that, I've listened to some things from Matt Christman, who, no shade on him. He is a really good, he's like a historical savant, essentially. He really knows his stuff. He's very, very on top of it. But I think that's also not quite true. I think the parties were ideological, but, the geographic differences were such that the you could have these ideological enclaves that were within the parties, and then the reason these ideological enclaves were stuck together the way they were was purely down to historical accident, which is the point I make in that video. But, getting back to what I was saying, the other thing I was trying to point out is that it's absurd to say that the Democrats were the party of the Klan. Certainly up until the 1960s, or the party that opposed civil rights up until the 1960s. Like what in the hell does an Irish voter in Boston want to have to do with the Southern Democratic Party? Was the point I was making in that. And frankly, the type of seersucker suit wearing boss hog didn't really want to have anything to do with the New York Democrat either. These were not interests that were truly aligned. The only reason they were in the same party was because that's just the way that things happen to shake out. So it's a solid critique. In future videos, I'll try to structure a bit more to let people know, this is what's being said. This is what I'm trying to refute, so it doesn't just sound like I'm preaching or pontificating or whatever. I think that's solid, and I'll take that into consideration in the future. And something from the last video that I really would have liked to have addressed in the video, but I just kind of ran out of time for, is kind of parsing out what the difference was between these lower Midwestern farmers who, as I said, tended to be very conservative all around, and then the upper Midwestern farmers who were more progressive. And both of these factions were still within the Republican Party up until the New Deal era. And there have been a lot of attempts to kind of like explain this, say that it's a cultural thing because of the different areas of Europe that these folks came from. One of them being more communal and the other one being more of the independent capitalist mindset. And I guess maybe that's a thing, but I also think that it really has a lot more to do with the kinds of conditions that these folks found themselves in when they settled, or were in originally when they came out. And so in the lower Midwest, you have much more favorable living conditions in general. The seasons aren't quite as harsh. You get a lot more rain. The soil quality is a lot better. And a lot of the folks who got farms in the lower Midwest, they got them through land-grant farms. And so a lot of them were veterans of the American Revolution, or they were veterans of the War of 1812. And so they were essentially paid back for their service, if they were paid back at all, and that's another thing to get into. But a lot of them were essentially paid back for their service through these land grants. The size of the farms between land grants and homesteaders weren't that much different, but the original land grant farms from the very early 19th century and into the late 18th century, there was more development in the areas where people got these, and so there were more opportunities for people to subdivide the property they got. These areas were massive, oftentimes like 5 square miles, that they were able to obtain. And it could be anywhere from like 1 square mile to 5 square miles or anything like that. But they had opportunities to subdivide parcels of their property, sell it off for development, and they got a lot of money by doing that. Whereas these homestead farmers in the upper Midwest, the seasonal conditions were a lot harsher. They had to depend on each other a lot more for to be able to survive and thrive when they could. That creates a communal atmosphere in and of itself. And then especially when you get into the Great Plains, conditions for farming are not, the soil is not that favorable. There's a lot of work that goes into tilling and maintaining. And so you needed to be able to rely on each other a lot more. And because there was generally less development in these areas, they did not have the opportunities to grow wealth by selling off large portions of their land. And so I think that, if you're comparing those two situations, that really is the big difference between these two groups. It's not, a cultural thing or anything else like that. It's very much a material thing. And that's something that I'm going to get into a little bit more in the next video, especially when looking at those earlier lower Midwest land grant farmers, because as I'd said, their form of conservatism and their form of rugged individualism is much more informative of what modern conservatives believe, I feel, than the kind of Western, the kind of Old West ideal or anything else like that. Or the Bourbon Democrats or whatever made up conservatism before. So that's one thing I want to get into. The next thing, so I got a really good question or a comment on the Republican Party video. When did the Republican Party stop being the party of Lincoln? That I gave a little bit of an answer to, but I wanted to flesh this out more. And the comment was from someone from Germany, and shout out. I took German in high school, so I I am not conversational. So please don't try to engage. But so the comment essentially was about why does America have this two-party system? It's kind of a weird curiosity. Even countries like Canada or the UK that have very similar voting mechanics with single-member districts, first past the post, oftentimes at least have 2.5 parties. In Canada you have the NDP, which is sort of the party of the, in massive quotation marks, far left. Or in the UK you have the Lib Dems who, depending upon the issue, at least tend to present themselves as an alternative that's left of the Labour Party, or is down the middle between the two parties. Again, as I said, that depends on the issue. Of course, their history was to start out as a moderate party. So why does America only have these two major parties? And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that there has always been, well, it's the first past the post, it's all that stuff, but I think a lot of it also comes down to the fact that there's always been a lot of money in American politics. A lot of small government conservatives, libertarians, they try to pretend that there was this time period once. There's a dog barking in the background. I live in a very noisy neighborhood. There's a major train line that's right down the street. It's just a lot of neighborhood activity. There's a major medevac helicopter route that's right overhead. So there's always some noise going on. And I always prefer to keep my windows open instead of using AC or whatever when it's possible. So sorry about that. There's always, there's this kind of myth that there was this time back before the New Deal or back before the Civil War or wherever, when we had this limited government, kind of connecting this back to the first video, when you had this limited government that was made up of nothing but educated citizens who were capable of making the best decisions, and they had, there was no profit motive in this for them or anything else like that. And I mean, the fact of the matter is that because of the patronage system, which has almost always been there, a lot of people say spoils system was set up by Andrew Jackson. I mean, really, even before that, we didn't have very professionalized bureaucracy, and whichever party was in power appointed its people into offices. But also, we never, until very, very recently, and even then, we mostly give out these things through contracts to private interests. We never had professional infrastructure development in the United States. It was always done by private individuals. And of course, today, money absolutely dominates American politics. It absolutely, both the major parties are bought out by corporate interests. The question is, which corporate interests are they bought out by? So, because there's always been so much money in American politics, it's just always behooved people to align themselves with one party or the other if their intention was to make money through either government service or through government contracts. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's not 100% as simple as that. There's more to it than that. I think that also the historical accidents that I went over in this video have a lot to do with that, and the fact that there have been times in the past in American politics and American history where you kind of did have one central question that drove everything and drove people into two parties. And of course, you have what I'm going to cover in the next video, which is the dawn of the ideological uniformity of the two major parties and how that came about. So there's a certain amount of historical accidents that go into that, but I think ultimately it really does come down to the spoils system, to government contracts, to the fact that there's so much money, has always been so much money to be made in the United States government. So yeah, it's a two-party system when you need to be with one party or the other to benefit from the government. And our government's always been set up for people to benefit from it. It's when the American founding fathers, I don't know whether, so when you're too confident for your abilities or for the circumstances, we generally call that stupid. But because the founders are not allowed to be called stupid, I will say that they misunderstood the realities of politics. But they set up this system in our Constitution that really only works if you don't have ideologically polarized politicians. And of course, in a lot of ways, we've had ideologically polarized politicians throughout the entire history of the United States. This failed almost immediately, as they had to admit with the 12th Amendment when they changed the president, vice president, electoral college situation. So, the fact that they set this thing up, this government that we have, so that it almost doesn't take into account a party dynamic or says that it's bad, while at the same time, party dynamic is the only way that politics has ever worked. And of course, we've seen the continued and increased breakdown of that over the entirety of my lifetime, going on almost 40 years now. It's either stupidity or the greatest troll ever. Going back to the last video, someone who is a friend of mine who watched the video, and they were being quite earnest in this, said that when I had said that the anti-black politics of the South won the argument, that sounded like a sort of very passive, like euphemistic thing. And so I just wanted to explain, or maybe I should say, what I would like people to stop doing is to stop thinking that the side that has the best quip, or the side that has the most well-constructed debating position wins the argument, or even that you win the argument by being more morally correct. The side that wins the argument in the end is the side that holds power, and the side that has the ability to exercise that power. And I see a lot of well-meaning folks, and some not so well-meaning ones, who sort of take this attitude, this kind of very online K-Hive liberal or college Republican attitude that, well, if I owned you in the end, if I convinced myself, and a couple of people on here that I am more correct than I won the argument. And maybe they did win the argument from a debate rules standpoint. However, in real life, it's never been the case that winning the argument, the victory in the argument goes to the side that had the better point. It's who holds power in the end. And I would like people to, if nothing else, maybe change up a little bit how they do politics and how they actually present issues to other people because of that. I certainly wish that a lot of my left-leaning and left friends would take that advice. I certainly don't want right-wingers to take good advice, but that's sort of what I was on with that. And what I was talking about, with the anti-black politics of the South winning the argument because they held the power in the end. On a fact check note, again, someone had noticed this. When I was talking about the readjusters in the video on the Republican Party and when they stopped being the party of Lincoln, someone noted that the readjusters actually elected 2 U.S. senators from Virginia, not just Mahone, but I think his name was Riddleberger. Yeah, Riddleberger. That was an honest mistake. Sorry about that. I just kind of skipped over that. So I did want to fact check myself there. But yeah, I'm gonna always try to keep these videos at or around or under 20 minutes. So I'm gonna sign off there. If you guys have any other questions, going back to my World War II video, second video, shout out, gentleman had a very interesting alternate history scenario, and I did want to give that a shout out as well. But either way, I'm going to cut this off here. If anyone has any questions, if you have anything you want me to address, any questions about the process or what I intend to cover, or, any questions about myself, I'm not going to get too private or personal, but still be happy to get into some of the details. Shout those out to me. I'll do my best to answer them. But in the meantime, thanks a lot, guys. Look forward to the next video.